everybody. I hope that you have by now had a time to read the committee's report. I intend just to give a brief summary of the committee's conclusions, and then one or two of my colleagues wish to make brief statements before we move to questions. I should first say that the report concentrates, not entirely, but in large part, on the issue of whether this committee was misled in the evidence that it received, principally during its 2009 inquiry, although we do go on to draw one or two wider conclusions. It is also important to say that the committee has not made any comment about the knowledge or the involvement or the evidence of any individuals who have been arrested. We have deliberately refrained from doing so because we are conscious of a risk that any comment might prejudice a possible criminal trial. Having said that, the committee did conclude unanimously that Les Hinton, the then chairman of News International, misled the committee in 2009 in not telling the truth about the payments made to Clive Goodman and his role in authorising them, and also in relation to the payment of his legal fees. The committee was also misled insofar as he did not divulge the full extent of his knowledge of allegations that phone hacking extended beyond Clive Goodman and Glenn Mulcair. We also concluded that Tom Crone misled the committee by giving a counter-impression of the significance of the confidentiality clause in the Gordon-Taylor settlement and sought to mislead the committee about the commissioning of surveillance. We concluded that Tom Crone and Colin Myler misled the committee by answering questions falsely about their knowledge of evidence that other News of the World employees had been involved in phone hacking and other wrongdoing. The committee went on to conclude, but only by a majority vote, that whilst there was no definitive evidence to prove whether or not James Murdoch was aware of the For Neville email, or indeed other evidence which indicated that phone hacking was more widespread, the committee was nevertheless astonished that he did not seek to see the evidence on which the decision to pay the settlement of the Gordon-Taylor case was based. The committee also went on, again, to conclude by a majority vote that corporately the News of the World and News International had misled the committee repeatedly about the true extent and nature of the investigations that they claimed to have carried out in relation to phone hacking, and that they had failed to disclose documents which would have revealed the truth. As a result of these various attempts to mislead the committee, the report that we published in 2010 was not based on a fully accurate picture. As a result of this, the committee has decided that we will table a motion in the House of Commons asking the House to endorse our conclusions about misleading evidence, and we will also refer our report to the Liaison Committee, which is looking into questions relating to the powers and effectiveness of select committees. Now, I believe one or two of my colleagues wish to add. Paul Farrelly.
Thank you, John. To put it politely, we've been led up the garden path by News International, but more importantly, so were the readers of its newspapers, the general public, and the victims of phone hacking. 2 years ago, in our report, we found the organisation guilty of collective amnesia and said it was inconceivable that one rogue reporter was involved. And we were right. On the same evidence that we received, however, the Press Complaints Commission exonerated the News of the World and indeed shot the messenger, The Guardian. After closure of the News of the World, for credibility's sake, we really had to look at who came and misled us, which was the reason for reopening this inquiry. Clearly, as John has said, we don't want to prejudice any future trials following the arrests. But we also thought that it was not right that a few people in these circumstances should carry the whole of the corporate can. And you'll find in the report a strong corporate finding against News International and News Corporation. And I would just remind people of one thing in relation to those findings, that Rupert Murdoch himself, who founded the organisation, has at all times been a director of News International and not just of News Corporation. Finally, one of the things we've sought to set out in the report is the human cost of phone hacking and other wrongdoing to which it contributed. It was not just a technical trick, a victimless potential crime, but the human cost is laid bare in some of the statements agreed finally by news group newspapers in open court, and in particular we cite one part of one of those statements, that of Charlotte Church and the treatment of her family.
Damien Collins.
Thank you. The report talks about our astonishment at the failure of the company to investigate fully and uncover incidents of phone hacking from the period certainly of the Gordon-Taylor settlement through to the end of 2010-11, when there were ample opportunities. There were plenty of lights flashing on the dashboard of that company to suggest that greater investigation was needed. In looking sort of crucially at the pivotal role of James Murdoch in the settlement of the Gordon-Taylor case, I think we have been minded to follow precisely the evidence we were given, which doesn't contradict anything he said to the committee, and therefore it's not been possible to say that he misled Parliament. But I think we can be critical of the actions of senior executives at that time in the failure of people in the company to disclose information about phone hacking, the failure of leaders in the company to investigate it fully, and overall a failure of corporate leadership. And I would just also like to touch on the pivotal role of Les Hinton, who we have been critical of, because it was stated at the Leveson inquiry last week, view that there was what senior executives in the company knew, which was very limited, and there was what lawyers and managers and editors within the company knew, which may have been greater. But in the role of Les Hinton, you there have someone that did have the opportunity to sit down with Clive Goodman and interrogate him personally about his employment claim, who was aware of allegations. And I think this key quote that was used, that was given to the committee in written evidence by Julian Pike from Farriners, that James Murdoch has used in his defence, this one of, Les no longer here, JM would say get rid of them, cut out the cancer. And that is focused very much on the role of James Murdoch. But it is also intriguing as to why Les was referenced. Had Les been there, would things have been dealt with differently? Did he know more? So I think he had a pivotal role. I think that's why it's quite important we focused on that in our report.
Thank you. Tom Watson.
It's been 10 years, 1 month and 9 days since News of the World hacked Millie Dowler's phone. 5 days ago, Rupert Murdoch admitted there was a cover-up at News Corporation. We found News Corporation carried out an extensive cover-up of its rampant law-breaking. Its most senior executives repeatedly misled Parliament, and the two men at the top, Rupert and James Murdoch, who were in charge of the company, must now answer for that. In the view of the majority of committee members, Rupert Murdoch is not fit to run an international company like B-Sky B. I'm personally disappointed that some members didn't feel sufficiently convinced or confident to hold the most powerful to account. They felt they couldn't support sections 216 to 229 of the report. Many hacking victims have still not been informed of what was done to them. And Rupert Murdoch has not said his last apology to the families of murdered children. Let us also remember that this scandal cost many hundreds of journalists, innocent journalists, their jobs. They found it hard to find work. I know this because I've provided references for a number of them. Parliament was misled, that we now know. But there were 4 issues we couldn't get to the bottom of because of time constraints, decisions of the committee not to proceed, or because they fall outside our remit. Former member of the Scottish Parliament, Tommy Sheridan, lost his liberty on a majority verdict of a jury that was not in full possession of the facts. He received a 3-year prison sentence. I believe the judgment is unsound. If Rupert Murdoch really is sorry, he will order an urgent review of the information his company provided to the jury in the Sheridan case. Now that we know that the former First Minister in Scotland was also a target of hacking, I'm writing to Alex Salmond to recommend he sets up an inquiry by the Scottish Parliament into how and why MSPs were targeted. Secondly, we asked the Murdochs about computer hacking, but we didn't get very far. I'm not certain, but I have reason to believe that the Serious Organised Crime Agency is in possession of seized hard drives that may show a list of victims who were the targets of computer hackers. There may well be a Mulcair 2 out there, where the authorities think it is right not to inform people who have had their privacy invaded by private investigators who have links with national newspapers. I'm writing to the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee today to raise my concerns and to ask that his committee do what it can to establish the facts. Thirdly, we were not able to establish the extent to which committee members were the targets of private investigators or journalists trying to collect information in order to either smear or influence. Last week, former chief reporter of News of the World, Neville Thurlbeck, said, "It was News International, not News of the World, which ordered us to dig into the private lives of the MPs on the committee, which was investigating us." He went on to say that many News International executives were in the loop. The committee did not have the time to act on these new allegations, but I think they are so serious they warrant an inquiry by the Committee of Standards and Privileges for a potential contempt of Parliament. And fourthly, though we've not had time to discuss it in committee, it is my personal view that we should embark on an investigation into the relationship between ministers, special advisers and lobbyists working for News International and B-Sky B. I repeat my call that the PM should allow the Leveson inquiry to view the private emails and texts of Treasury advisers and Mr Frederick Michel of News International and Mr Graham McWilliam of B-Sky B. The truth is that, whatever we have said in our report, and however you choose to report it tomorrow, the public have made up their minds. Powerful people were involved in a cover-up, and they still haven't accepted responsibility. And after all of this, the story is not yet over. It was reported at the weekend that Rebecca Brooks was prepared to release her personal texts and emails to David Cameron to the Leveson inquiry. I think she should. But as the Prime Minister said yesterday, the contacts between Rupert Murdoch and senior ministers crossed both sides of the House. If we really want to see how News Corp in the UK operates, then the current PM and Chancellor, all former Prime Ministers, including Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and former Chancellors, might want to consider revealing their texts and emails to company executives. These people corrupted our country. They brought shame on our police force and our Parliament. They lied and cheated, blackmailed and bullied, and we should all be ashamed when we think how we cowered before them for so long. But to really stop requires more than tokenistic retribution. It needs conclusive attribution. The very cornerstone of justice is that those really responsible are held to account, that the rich and powerful are as low in the face of the law as the most humble and weak. In the words of Bob Dylan, that the ladder of law has no top and no bottom, and everybody in the world knows who is responsible for the wrongdoing of News Corp. Rupert Murdoch. More than any individual alive, he is to blame. Morally, the deeds are his. He paid the piper and he called the tune. It is his company, his culture, his people, his business, his failures, his lies, his crimes, the price of profits and his power.
Thank you, Tom. I think it's fair to say that
Expect a round of applause.
that was not the unanimous view of the committee. I think Philip Davis.
Well, coming back to the report, which I don't think any of that was anything to do with the report, but if we come back to the report, I think the chairman was right to focus on the parts of the report where we unanimously agreed, and that was on the people who misled the committee and in the way in which they did mislead the committee. And I very much hope that people won't get sidelined by the other bits of what we've just heard of, which were not the overwhelming view of the committee, not the unanimous view of the committee, but were passed by a majority. And I think when people look at the report, they might want to look at some of the amendments that were tabled and the votes that took place. I think that when people do that, they will see that the report was only passed by 6 votes to 4 as a result, particularly of the conclusion about Rupert Murdoch. I think many people will conclude, unfortunately, because I think it may well detract from the unanimous recommendations of the committee. I think some people may conclude that some people's conclusions were written before any of the evidence was ever heard or gone over, and I think that's very sad too. People will see that there was a majority of 2 on the committee for these things. People may also want to notice that 2 of those people who voted for those things weren't even on the committee to listen to any of the evidence at the time, and yet felt sufficiently strongly to vote for those rather controversial recommendations. And I just urge people to get back to the nitty-gritty of this report, what this report was supposed to do. It's a very serious business. We're making decisions about which affect people's lives, their reputations. And I think that rather than focusing on certain people getting carried away, I think I would urge you to look at the things where we've made unanimous conclusions which are very, very serious for the people concerned. And those people should, as the chairman said in his opening remarks, should be held to account. And that's why we want to put forward a motion to Parliament to ask them to endorse our conclusions, so that people realise how serious it was that those people at News International misled this committee. Nobody's saying that people like James Murdoch and Rupert Murdoch haven't made mistakes. I'm sure they've actually admitted themselves they've made mistakes. And you know, I don't really have much trouble with News International in the sense that they tried to get me kicked off the original inquiry back in 2009. But I think we've got to be fair about these things. We've got to base our decisions based on the evidence and not what we'd like the evidence to be. And therefore I urge you to look at where we've made unanimous conclusions of the committee, rather than getting carried away by some people who, I'm afraid, have got carried away themselves and have decided, it seems, what the conclusions were before they actually started out on the inquiry.
Louise Mensch.
I want to start by saying that I have the highest respect for my friend and colleague Tom Watson. He is a man of complete and total integrity, and I have absolutely no doubt that the amendments that he put forward to the report and the speech he's just read out today represent his very sincere views from the heart, and I have the highest respect for them. That said, it is not completely correct to say, as Tom just did, that some members of the committee have problems with sections 216 to 219 or whatever it was. Members of the press can look at the divisions in the back, and I encourage them to do so. When they look at how the voting went, they will see that Conservative members of the committee did not vote as a block and often disagreed with each other and divided in different ways on different amendments. That was not, however, the same with our Labour colleagues, and it is not simply a matter of not voting for certain amendments. No Conservative member on this committee with a vote was able to recommend the report itself to the House. And every one of us, while we shared different views about the culpability of News Corporation and the degree of culpability of James Murdoch in particular, none of us were able to support the report, and we all voted against it. That will mean it will be correctly seen as a partisan report, and we've lost a very great deal of its credibility, which is an enormous shame. And the issue on which no Conservative member felt they could support the report itself was the line put in the middle of the report that said that Mr. Rupert Murdoch is not a fit person to run an international company. We all felt that was wildly outside the scope of a select committee, was an improper attempt to influence Ofcom and to tread on areas that is not the province of a select committee. And our report, at least ostensibly, was about whether or not the prior committee have been misled. And even though clearly the many amendments tabled by my colleagues Paul Farrelly and Tom Watson were carried by majority votes, I would nonetheless have voted for the report and explained where I disagreed. And so would many of my colleagues, not all of them, but many of them, had that line about Rupert Murdoch's unfitness to run an international company not been left in. It was, however, left in, and on that basis, I'm afraid to say, despite our wildly differing views, as recorded in the votes, not a one of us could agree that this report ought to be placed before the House, and it was carried on political lines. And therefore, after years, many months of work, I fear that its credibility has been damaged. But I don't doubt the integrity of members opposite who wanted to argue that. This is the result we're left with, and I do think it is a real great shame.
Jerry Sutcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I need to respond to the allegations by my colleague, the member for Shipley. As a new member of the committee, I have looked at the evidence. I have made sure that I looked at great detail at the role of the committee. I think bringing a new focus to the committee has helped the committee in terms of the detail of what has been said. But I've been a member of this House for 18 years. I've been a minister for 12 years. And I have been worried about the influence of News International over that period of time. And I think anybody reading this report fairly, forgetting the breakdown of the voting, will see a worrying situation that needs to be addressed. And I do agree with the Chairman. I think if we look at where we agree, all of us, in terms of the recommendations, they are beyond doubt. It is open to political debate, the rest, and I understand that. But clearly, this is perhaps the worst situation I've seen in terms of our democracy in the time that I've been an MP.
Therese Coffey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to just stress that some of what the Chairman reiterated earlier, I'm very proud that it is Parliament that initiated this inquiry. I'm very proud that we've been able, through the powers of Parliament, to have information laid before us that have subsequently been able to use at Leveson Inquiry and other ongoing litigation. And without that, there is certain evidence that would not be admissible in the current inquiry. I also want to add that I've consistently opposed bringing into our report the evidence from civil litigations and also the Leveson inquiry, and have wanted to focus pretty much exclusively on the evidence presented directly to us as MPs, whether in oral or written fashion, evidence that we were able to see all of, that we were able to ask questions about, to follow up with inquiries, and that is why I consistently opposed various amendments that draw on other matters. As I said before, News International will particularly regret dismissing the last report that was issued by our predecessor committee on this matter. They will regret forever not taking the chance to thoroughly investigate the allegations made then and the recommendations made then. I can understand for somebody who's worked in a family-run business, a very big family-run business, about how when you are attacked by people making allegations, it can be easy to dismiss, especially as is critical in businesses, and you see happen in family-run businesses, the implicit trust that people have in their executives and in each other. But what I would say to them now, certainly, I hope that all the directors of News Corp and News International will read this report from front to end and don't just dismiss it like the last one. I'm sure they won't. And, Mr. Chairman, I think it is sad that we were not able to present a United report. You've already heard reasons why it was not possible, or why I certainly felt it was not possible to vote for the report, as was expressed by my colleague Louise Mensch. But again, reflecting what Philip Davis has said, I hope we can focus on what we did agree on, and the motion will be debated in Parliament, I hope, early in the new session.
Steve Rotherham.
Just a very brief comment, Chair, on the unfortunate comments by the member for Shipley who's decided to personalise this. I made my decisions absolutely based on the evidence presented to the committee and no other reason.
Adrian Sanderson.
The committee's report is the result of 9 months' work in an ever-changing environment of new revelations and lines of inquiry. We've at last drawn a line and published our findings, and it will now fall on Parliament to determine how it wishes to deal with them. As for political divides, we are in a political chamber, and I have no doubt that the comments that my Conservative friends have made would have been precisely the comments that my Labour friends would have made had I voted the other way.
Oh, Jim.
I do feel compelled to say something on this situation, but I have to say that I wholeheartedly agree with Tom Watson's comments, and in particular the level of blame that's laid against Rupert Murdoch. Regardless of who said what and when, Rupert Murdoch is the head of this corporation and therefore should carry the can for the unspeakable actions of the people who he employed. And just being parochial for a minute in terms of Scotland, there is some suspicion surrounding the situation with the First Minister, Alex Salmond, and his dealings with Rupert Murdoch, hence the reason why the Murdoch newspapers have swung behind and supporting the SNP in Scotland. So that therefore begs the question, why? So even at this late stage, I would ask Alex Salmond to come clean, look at this report, learn from this report, and more importantly, act on this report. As Tom Watson has already said, someone lost his liberty as a result of the evidence given in the Tommy Sheridan case, and he and his family deserve some kind of inquiry into why that happened.
Thank you. Gary Gibbon.
Thank you very much. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News. Chairman, can I ask you, because I'm not entirely clear from the divisions at the back, is it your view that Rupert Murdoch is or isn't a fit and proper person to run an international company? And yourself and other members of the committee, you, as far as I can work out from the divisions at the back, the voting divisions, you've all agreed, haven't you, that what James and Rupert Murdoch have been saying, that they didn't know it was more than one reporter until December 2010, is simply astonishing. That sounds to me like a word that a lawyer has inserted to avoid the word incredible being in the text. How can that be true and Rupert Murdoch be a fit and proper person to run a company?
In response to your first part of your question, and this applies not just to the passage which you quote, but it applies to all divisions which took place in the committee, the chairman does not vote. The chairman does have a vote if there is a tie, in which case the chairman has a casting vote, but otherwise the chairman does not vote. I would merely observe that as well as being chairman of the committee, I'm a Conservative Member of Parliament. In response to your second question, the committee did, in large part, find it astonishing that James Murdoch particularly stated to us that he did not become aware of the Neville email and the evidence until much later. I think how you interpret that, individual members of the committee will undoubtedly like to explain for themselves why they supported that conclusion, or I think in one case did not. But I think we were all agreed that astonishing was a good word, which we could all those voting with, I think, the one exception, could support. Louise, do you want to?
I'd like to chime in because I voted for that amendment and we had some lively discussion about it. I said to Paul Farrelly, who tabled the amendment, that I could vote for it as written, though not presumably for the same reasons that he wished to imply in the drafting of it. It is, I think, absolutely astonishing that this was not known of the company until later, and that is because, in my opinion only, people lower down the chain of command did not make it adequately clear to their bosses what was going on. There was, in my opinion, a deliberate attempt at a cover-up that was made. Therefore, I completely agree that it was astonishing that people were not more open and didn't lay the facts bare. So, for that reason, I supported the amendment. And my colleague Dr. Coffey felt that it might be, the interpretation might be put on it, which you have just placed on it, and for that reason she did not support it. But I think it's indisputably amazing that this was not laid bare to senior management at News Corporation when it happened. The question is on whom does the blame for that devolve?
If I could put so, we didn't answer the second part of your question, which was about fit and proper. You know, if we accept they're astonishing, are they fit and proper people? And I think this is something where we have to, I think, respect in some ways what the inquiry was about, which was about whether Parliament was misled by people about the knowledge of phone hacking and the actions people had taken. We didn't take evidence looking at corporate governance in the round, and therefore I think it's difficult for us to take a view about the way executives perform in their operations within a company. You might be very critical about that. There's lots of critical language about the way in which people led the business and the decisions that they took. But I certainly think that the four of us that voted against the section on Rupert Murdoch felt that this was not something that we'd investigated, and there was no evidence linking him directly to knowledge within the business. Now, people may find that astonishing, but nevertheless, that is where we got to. And I think it was quite important that we did draw that line, and our view was that we should focus on the evidence that we had found about what very senior people in that organisation knew, and on those points there was unanimity, as well as a lot of critical language about the way in which people acted, and as I said, people's failure to see the lights flashing on the dashboard of that company when there was clearly lots of warnings of problems within the organisation.
Could I just very briefly, Gary, I drafted the amendment and I'm certainly not a lawyer. We've followed the evidence, and all my amendments have followed the evidence. And with James Murdoch, for example, given the conflicting accounts and the history of what we've been told by witnesses going back 5 years from News International, we simply couldn't make our minds up with any conviction about whether he misled or not. Time possibly may tell if other evidence emerges. But whilst following the evidence, it was important to just get our heads up and look at the bigger picture, because we were told that notwithstanding everything that had happened, all the media revelations, including New York Times, not just The Guardian, our report, the wide publication of evidence such as the Fore Neville email, we were just being told effectively that it was only in late December 2010, as long in the process of that there was an epiphany moment, allegedly, that where they suddenly at the top realised that the one rogue reporter defence was not true. And I drafted astonishing in its literal sense, because I had a head-shaking moment. How could this come to happen?
Jay Jones.
Thank you. Joey Jones from Sky News. Could I ask you, Mr. Whittingdale, obviously you're trying very hard to avoid getting into these party political waters, but surely you must be able to guide us a little. If somebody says that some of these conclusions are partisan or politically motivated, I mean, how would you respond to that? And you've said that you're going to ask the House to vote on the conclusions of the committee. Might the House not be a little confused as to what the overall conclusions of the committee are?
Well, in terms of how members voted and their motives for doing so, that is for them to say, and they're all here present and will undoubtedly do so. What I would say is that the motion that we are tabling in the House will concentrate on the issue of Parliament being misled on specific evidence presented to this committee. That was the main remit for the committee in its latest inquiry, and in large part, indeed almost entirely, that on those specific issues this committee was unanimous. So therefore, whatever additional statements which proved more controversial, which are included in the report, the main findings of the committee, which relate to misleading evidence given to the Select Committee, this committee was wholly agreed. And therefore, when we come to have the debate, I hope that that is the area where all those who contribute to the debate will concentrate. Lucy Manning.
Thank you very much, Lucy Manning from ITV News. Could I maybe ask one MP to explain why they think Rupert Murdoch isn't fit to run a company, and another MP to explain why they think Rupert Murdoch is fit? And for those who are found guilty of misleading Parliament, are you going to be taking them to the parliamentary cells? What's the punishment?
Can I have a volunteer from either side?
Why don't you answer the last one first?
Well, in terms of what the consequences are, to some extent, not for the first time, this committee is exploring uncharted water. We have gone as far as to say that we wish to have this matter drawn to the attention of the House, and it is for the House to decide what consequences follow. But there will be others with more knowledge and experience than me who presumably advise on what potential consequences could be. Now, Damien Collins.
Well, I think just to be clear, when we made the decision yesterday on the report, we were given an amendment with a very set wording. And as you will all know, the description of whether someone is a fit and proper person is a matter that Ofcom considers when deciding whether someone can hold a UK broadcasting licence. It's a very precise definition. I think we took proper out, but it's it's fit a person. Sounds like the committee is making a judgment based on a legal ruling made by the media regulator in the UK. And that was not something we'd investigated. Now, you may have all sorts of personal opinions about Rupert Murdoch and his company and the way he conducts his affairs, but that was not something as a committee we had taken evidence on, and we were in a position we thought to make a judgment on. It was an opinion presented to the committee to vote on. What we were in a position to do was make a decision about who had misled Parliament based on their knowledge. That was what we'd investigated, that's what we took evidence on, and that's what we published in substance and we agreed on in unanimity.
And the alternative view? Jim Sheridan.
The reason I support the statement that Rupert Murdoch is not a fit person to run an international organisation, I think we have to go back to the fundamentals in the sense that News International, News Corp, in my view anyway, acted as if they were above and beyond the law. And to suggest, as some people suggest, there was some sort of glass ceiling that didn't reach Rupert Murdoch or indeed James Murdoch is, in the words of a report, astonishing. To suggest that huge amounts of money was paid out to people without senior executives knowing about it is incredible. So people, and I think the general public, will draw the conclusion that it is astonishing that people at that level running a company didn't know what was happening. So as I said earlier, Rupert Murdoch was the top of the tree, so therefore he, I believe, should carry the can. And in terms of James Murdoch, if this was in a Scottish court or a Scottish committee, I think the verdict would be not proven.
Can I just say, I want to go further than Damien. To me, quite clearly, Rupert Murdoch is a fit person to run a major international company. He's been running businesses since before I was born. He's run successful businesses. He's employed hundreds of thousands of people around the world. He's made a huge difference to the media industry. We have seen absolutely no evidence to suggest that Rupert Murdoch was aware of any of these things that were going on at News International, at News of the World. If I thought he'd have been aware of what was going on and he deliberately covered it up and maybe committed any crime in doing so, then I would have been happy to say I don't think he's a fit person to run a company. We've seen absolutely no evidence to suggest that was the case. Yes, of course, he's made mistakes. Of course, James Murdoch's made mistakes. Making mistakes, we all make mistakes. I make dozens every day. Hands up anyone here who hasn't made a mistake. We all make mistakes. We all wish we'd done things differently from time to time, and hindsight can be a wonderful thing. But to take that to say that this person is not a fit person to run a major international company when he's been doing that for decades seems to me to be not only way over the top, but also completely ludicrous.
The bottom line is we had no evidence on this. And it seemed to me that even in a report as partisan and down political lines as this one was voted on, no member of the committee could find it in their hearts to say that either James or Rupert Murdoch had misled the committee. Nobody, even in the report as it's published. Therefore, it did appear to us that something negative had to be found to say about Rupert Murdoch, since nobody was going to conclude that either he or his son had misled our committee. And therefore this line about Rupert Murdoch not being a fit person, which echoes Ofcom's fit and proper test, was stuck in on the basis of no evidence presented to the committee whatsoever, and we just could not support it. As I say, even though many, many votes went against my point of view on James Murdoch and on the corporate culture at News Corporation, I would definitely have voted for the report had that language not been placed in it.
Yes, in front row.
David Grossman, BBC Newsnight. You'll be aware of the questioning so far has concentrated a lot on the divisions within the committee. Can I ask Tom Watson, why was it so important to get in that line about Rupert Murdoch being a fit person to run a major international company when the expense has been, or the cost of getting that line in has been, allowing opponents of this process to portray it as along party lines, as political payback or whatever?
I understand your point, David, and there is a judgment you have to make with these reports about whether you go for a weaker report and gain unanimity, or whether you stand up for what you steadfastly believe. And where I came to, and obviously the majority of non-Conservative members came to, was that we needed to raise the bar. And for me, that was because in the last report in 2009, the truth is we were negligent. We made a mistake. We invited Rebecca Brooks, the chief executive of the company, to give evidence on 3 occasions. And on 3 occasions, she rebuffed us. And we decided at the last minute not to compel her to give evidence. And that was because there was huge amounts of pressure placed on the committee. There was an election looming, so there was time pressures, but there were also sort of political pressures, in my view, for us to do that. And I didn't want us to be accused in 12 months' time of ducking our responsibility. And I wanted the committee to be courageous and confident and come to a view about the most powerful media mogul in this country. And it would have been wrong for those News of the World journalists who lost their jobs, and for those victims, and for those people that are actually facing justice, for us not to comment on Rupert Murdoch just because of who he is. We've got an honest disagreement here, you can see that. But I just felt that it was important that as a member of the individual members of the committee and collectively, we spoke out.
Just to add to that, for David, when the game was up in terms of the one rogue reporter, as you'll see from the text here, possibly 2 rogue journalists, one of whom shouldn't be named because of the criminal proceedings. What we saw from News Corporation, to our mind, and it's relayed in the report, was a clear strategy. We were being invited to blame Tom Crone and Colin Myler. And you'll see from the corporate conclusions, and not just the conclusions regarding Rupert Murdoch, that we simply declined that invitation.
Can I just say, David, that quoting my good friend and colleague Dennis Skinner last week when he made the comment in the chamber about when posh boys are in trouble we sack the servants, I'm almost certain that if we hadn't put that line in there, you and your colleagues would have been asking the question, why is the people at the top of News International not been identified as some sort of blame whatsoever? So I'd just say that, we can't have our cake and eat it.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's fair to point out on the 14th of July 2011, the committee was unanimous in a division and a recorded vote to summons both James and Rupert Murdoch. So unlike perhaps 2009-2010, when perhaps you decided to shy away, we weren't. We were absolutely united in wanting to pursue the evidence. We just strongly disagree on where the evidence conclusions came out.
That's true. Yes.
Hi, Ben Fenton from the Financial Times. I'm not a lobby reporter, so I may just be speaking out of ignorance. Was it open to the Conservative members of the committee to publish a dissenting report, or minority report, as the Americans would call it? And if it was, could one of them please explain why they chose not to do it?
Simply on procedural issues. Obviously, any member of the Select Committee could prepare a minority report, but actually, as we have emphasised repeatedly, a very large part of this report was unanimous. Therefore, it was probably more sensible that where there were divisions, it was made clear in votes, which are recorded and appear in the back of the report. But the fact that the large first part of the report was supported by everyone was something which I think all of my colleagues felt was the most important outcome.
Can I also point out, though, that not all Conservative members on the committee agreed with each other on every aspect of the report. So it wasn't that we had a sort of a block Conservative view on these matters. So it wouldn't even have been feasible to have a minority report because amongst the 4 of us, if you look at the divisions, we voted in different ways on different amendments.
Sorry, I accept that, of course, but is it right in that case to
come out now and say the report lacks credibility, has lost some of its credibility because of for those reasons.
Well, we voted against the report.
Yeah.
So of course we're going
All
to
of
say
us
that.
voted against the report.
But if that sentence wasn't in the report, we probably would have all voted in favour of it.
Exactly right.
In the middle, yes.
Yep.
Ben Webster from The Times. Could I just ask Adrian Sanders this, and perhaps the chairman as well, if you had voted the other way, then, as the only Lib Dem member who voted on the committee, then it would have been split, which would have meant, correct me if I'm wrong here, that John Whittingdale's casting vote would have come into play and the report would have been rejected. And if that is the case, I just ask Mr. Sanders, you have a lot of responsibility there for your vote, and why did you decide to vote with the Labour members, and did you consult other people in your party?
We all have a collective responsibility as a committee to seek the truth. And from the evidence that was presented, from my experience of the previous committee that looked at hacking, and in particular the evidence that was presented to this one, I took a decision on that. And any one member at the end of the day could be that person holding the balance of power, depending on how other individuals made their mind up. Just happens that it was on one section of this report along party lines. It certainly wasn't on other divisions in other parts. How then the chair would have exercised his casting vote, I have absolutely no idea at all. And I think it would be probably wrong of the chairman to give an opinion, because he can only cast that vote in the circumstances in which it arises and not with hindsight.
Indeed. What I would say is that it is a matter of some regret to me that the committee were not able to produce a unanimous report, particularly when on a large number of the issues the committee was in total agreement. And I'm sorry that, in a sense, the strength of the unanimous conclusions has been diluted by the fact that this press conference and attention outside of it will focus on areas where the committee was unable to agree. Yes.
Jean Whalen with the Wall Street Journal. Can you just clarify which aspects of the report were unanimously supported, and also which individuals could be accused of contempt?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at the voting at the back, it becomes apparent. But in terms of the main conclusions, those relating to the individuals' names, specifically Les Hinton, Tom Crone and Colin Myler, those conclusions were agreed unanimously.
Thank you. Andy Bell, 5 News. I'm just wondering what you think the public are supposed to make of this, because we've had months where they've been seeing this reported and the Leveson Inquiry and all the rest of it. This was an opportunity, in a sense, to give a lead and to say what you think, and we've ended up with a committee report which is split down party lines. I know the Conservative MPs will say they disagreed on various aspects, but you've come away in the end with a report which does lack credibility. Is that that must be a matter of great disappointment to you, and presumably to all the members of the committee?
Well, in actual fact, as I said earlier, I mean, the main focus of this committee in its most recent inquiry was into the question of whether or not we were misled in the evidence that we were given. It is on that subject we intend to table a motion reporting to Parliament, and it is actually on that issue where there is no division within the committee. So to that extent, this is a unanimous report to Parliament that the committee was misled by named individuals.
Andy, if I could come back on that, you have probably noticed from the individual members of this committee that they are all unique in their strong views and wills. And I happen to think that that is a good thing, but it does mean that sometimes you get split reports, and I have no doubt that you will be able to interpret our report and put both views to the public so that they can form their own view. It's my view they've already formed a view on Rupert Murdoch's company, and that this is yet further. This further shows how power corrupted the institutions of the United Kingdom.
Sorry, just before you do.
I mean, clearly, what is perceived out there is also depends on how you report this press conference. But I just take you back to the question from Gary right at the outset, and if you look at paragraph 163, the bigger picture, and when everyone knew, and you look at the division in the back, the committee, and you look at the implications of that paragraph, the committee was pretty much unanimous because it was 9-1 in favour. And this is the paragraph about astonishment.
Yeah.
Hi, sorry. Keir Simmons from ITV News. Do Conservative members now face a difficult choice in the chamber as to how to vote and whether that vote will be perceived as supporting the Murdochs? And also, in terms of the report, where it says the whole affair demonstrates huge failings of corporate governance at the company and its parent News Corporation, is that the view of the whole committee, and what would you recommend News Corporation shareholders to do?
Well, the question's already been answered in terms of will we be able to support the motion that comes before the House, because the motion that comes before the House will be about Parliament being misled, and we will all be able to support that motion. So that question doesn't arise. As to the failures of corporate governance, this is actually a great example to show that Damien Collins voted in favour of that. I voted against it. We didn't vote as a bloc. There clearly were failures of corporate governance at News Corporation. There is no doubt about that. The Management and Standards Committee has taken it to task. That's right and proper. But it's not really for members of the Select Committee to be advising News Corporation shareholders on what they do and don't do. That's just wildly outside the remit of our committee. And that's where it comes back to the fact that the fit and proper line, the Rupert Murdoch line, which all the reporting will concentrate on, is what prevented us from being able to agree a report to the House almost unanimously. And yes, of course, that is a huge shame.
Well, just add to that, I mean, as the Chairman said earlier, the purpose of the motion before the House will be to decide whether people are guilty of contempt of Parliament.
Yep.
Now, we're all agreed on that, and that is the substance of the report. It's what we were investigating. It's the first time it's been done since the 1950s. And we've spent a long time talking about something which isn't even included in the next steps of the report because it is, tangential to it, although obviously a subject of interest.
I would point out that Mr. Colin Myler is the editor of the New York Daily News, and we have just found that he has misled a select committee of Parliament. I would hope that a little bit of attention would be paid to the unanimous findings of the committee where named individuals misled Parliament. And furthermore, to answer the very good question posed by Lucy Manning, which is if somebody comes in front of Parliament and lies to it, what happens next? The fact is, we don't necessarily have the procedures in place, and we will therefore be referring it to Parliament to find out what to do. But serious conclusions have been drawn about people misleading Parliament, on which we're all united. There is a lot in this report on which the committee completely agrees. That's the shame that we weren't able to agree on the report itself because of the line about Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah.
James Cusick from The Independent. Did any News Corps advisor attempt to contact or influence the outcome of this report? And I know that some members of the committee have been contacted, I think by Fred Michel as one name, but anybody else?
Well, in terms of the evidence which I think Rupert Murdoch presented to the Leveson inquiry, listing contacts between News Corp and this committee, I mean, they named a number of members of the committee, but just those currently on the committee and indeed members of the previous committee. I certainly have spoken to Fred Michel in the past. I've always adopted a policy of an open door, not just in this inquiry, but in all inquiries. But if people wish to come and talk to me about to give their point of view, I will listen to them. But the question about whether or not they attempted to influence, yes, to the extent that they were putting their case, but they didn't do anything which in my view was improper, and equally I heard people who came to see me who had just as strong views in the other direction.
Can I just add to that? I would reiterate exactly what the Chairman said, exactly the same applies to me. I can put my hand on my heart and say nobody has tried to influence what I said in the report. And if anybody knows anything about me, they would know it would be a completely futile exercise to try and influence what I think. I think I'm sufficiently known as being independently minded to be completely, I won't be affected by anybody's attempts to try and influence me. And certainly, I can put my hand on my heart and say that absolutely did not happen.
I can back Philip up on that. That it would be entirely counterproductive to try and brief or influence Philip in terms of changing his opinions in any report. And likewise myself, I don't know Fred Michel. They've not contacted me during this inquiry, and I can't, despite my name being there in Leveson, remember anyone contacting or trying to influence me on a previous inquiry, because that would be particularly stupid, I would think.
Chair, just for the record, can I say that I've never sought nor been invited to meet with any representative from News International.
Yes,
I don't know my colleague.
Jim, I don't think I've been lobbied or received hospitality either.
Yes, front row.
Jason Gross from the Daily Mail. This all looks like a bit of a shambles, Mr. Chairman. Are you, you've ended up with a report that half the committee have voted against. Do you consider that you failed?
No, because I think, as I have said, and indeed most of my colleagues who have spoken have said, that on the main findings of the committee in the area which we were tasked to examine, which was whether or not Parliament had been misled, the committee was unanimous. And I hope, therefore, that will be what people concentrate on. That may be a vain hope, but I would like to think that people will concentrate on that, and certainly that will be the message that we will be relaying to the House of Commons in the motion.
I just want to say that it was put to Tom in our discussions that if you would leave this line out, that we would be able to support the report. And he decided not to on a point of principle. It is all right for people who have different political views to disagree in a principled fashion on things that are close to their heart and about which they care very much. Tom knew that the consequence would be that the Conservative members would not support the report, and he chose to press the amendment anyway, and he was completely within his rights to do so. It is not a bad thing and not a shambles when people who have genuine disagreements in principle disagree, take a vote and put those disagreements on the record. So he had every right to press his amendment to the vote.
Can I just say that you may focus on negativities and report it in any way you wish to report it, but I think the most important issue that's raised here today is that this committee has shone the light and exposed criminal activity within our established press and media. That had led to the Leveson inquiry, which would not have happened had it not been for this committee. So I know it's always a comfort zone to be on the negative side, but I sincerely hope that when you're reporting it, that we are hopefully shone the light on what was criminal activity, and hopefully it will stop.
The report says that Rupert Murdoch's self-portrayal as a hands-off proprietor was, you consider, a misleading account of his involvement and influence with his newspapers. Are you accusing him there of misleading you?
That was my amendment, and you've got the text there. What we found was that on times when it suited witnesses, they forgot, didn't remember, or the top said, well, this was such a small part of my empire that or our empire, that we didn't pay it too much attention. And then we have testimony which is recounted from Rebecca Brooks, that when chief executive, she would speak to Rupert Murdoch every other day. You can draw your own conclusions from that. This is a fruitless plea, of course. There shouldn't be a focus simply on Rupert Murdoch here, because there is a corporate conclusion here about News Corporation and News International. If there was one phrase from the last report that resounded around the world, including Australia, I think the phrase was collective amnesia. If there's one phrase apart from Rupert Murdoch that should possibly echo in the same way in this report, it's one that is used in amendments by me, from me and from Tom Watson, but it was a question that our colleague Adrian Sanders first asked in an evidence session, and that was about willful blindness. And that phrase of willful blindness in respect of the whole corporate conclusions, the failure to follow up very public wrongdoing, not just phone hacking, and discipline the perpetrators. I think that phrase should perhaps receive some focus as well.
Thank you. Dan Saber.
Hi. Rupert Murdoch did give evidence to the committee, and he is the chairman and chief executive of News Corporation. So I'm slightly I don't quite understand why Conservative members felt that discussion about Rupert Murdoch was somehow ultra-virus to the committee's remit. Perhaps they could explain that. And furthermore, why did they not propose any alternative amendments if they disliked the characterisation of Rupert Murdoch as put in the amendment that was agreed? And in particular, why did they not propose an alternative amendment vis-à-vis the fit person statement?
Answer that. First of all, in terms of, well, I'll answer the same. Why do we not put an alternative? That was an amendment to the report. We were voting to retain the status quo of the report. It was Tom who put forward an amendment. So you don't put forward an amendment to an amendment that hasn't yet been voted on. I mean, that's just you know, I don't really understand your point, to be perfectly honest.
If I could, sorry, if you finish.
I'll go on you if you want to.
No, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. So if you've got,
no, that's fine.
We had to decide whether Rupert Murdoch had misled us in what he said to Parliament, and no one has proposed at any point that he misled Parliament. Now there is in the corporate in the next step section where you look at the corporate blame. That was an amendment that I supported in the vote. And there we are critical of the company as a whole in putting too much emphasis on the rigour of internal investigation and the action being taken by the company. And that is a criticism of Rupert and James Murdoch as well as other executives who are named in the report. So I think we certainly have been critical, but both in terms of his role and some of the things that he said. But what no one has proposed is that he misled Parliament.
And that's why nobody said that Rupert Murdoch wasn't a justifiable target for the report. I don't think anybody said that. I think what we just said was we didn't agree with the conclusion that's in the report about Rupert Murdoch.
What conclusion would you reach?
Well, if you look at the divisions at the back, you'll see that we would have agreed the status quo of the report without that particular amendment in it.
There would have been no comments on Rupert Murdoch.
So you would have said nothing about Rupert Murdoch?
No, because we don't believe, as Damien said, we don't believe he misled the committee. We were looking at, the whole purpose of our inquiry was, did people mislead this committee? In our previous report back in 2009, when our report was published in 2010, we don't believe, I didn't see any evidence from, I'm not sure that anybody did, that Rupert Murdoch misled the committee. We haven't seen any evidence that James Murdoch misled the committee. We've concluded that the three individuals that we've already mentioned did mislead the committee. That's why we didn't agree with the conclusion about Rupert Murdoch. If we'd have thought that Rupert Murdoch had misled the committee, I'm sure we would have all agreed a recommendation to that effect. But there was no evidence there to suggest that.
I'm sure you've all read it. But I mean, it does say, you know, which is the section I voted for. This was not done on the basis of one party voting. At the end of the conclusions and next steps, that the News International, its parent company News Corporation, exhibited willful blindness for which the company's directors, including Rupert Murdoch and James Murdoch, should ultimately be prepared to take responsibility. So, you know, there is comment within the conclusions, and that would have stood even without the additional line that Tom Watson was so keen that we had. That meant, regrettably, we had to divide on the whole report.
Okay. Yep.
Hi there, Harry Cole from the Guido Fawkes blog. Were there any objections from the committee to one of their members putting out their own version of events in a book before today's report was finalised? And what assurance did you seek, Mr. Chairman, to make sure that no privileged information given to the committee was used in Dial M for Murdoch by Mr. Watson, especially given the findings of the report are all but revealed on page 312?
Well, what I would say is that almost all the evidence that was presented to this committee was published on the internet almost the same day or very shortly afterwards. So in terms of privileged information which was not available, actually there is very little that we didn't make public. The only ones we did not make public were where we were specifically asked not to do so. I'm not aware that Tom Watson in his book used any information which was given to the committee which was not made public, but perhaps he'd like to address
Harry,
that.
yes, thank you. Good to see you again. Firstly, your servers are held abroad, so I'm told I can't sue you for libel. Secondly, all the information in the book comes from either public sources, and where I thought the committee may want to see evidence, I submitted it to the clerks, some of which was used, most of which wasn't used because of the justice issue. But I'd like to put a question to you. Can you tell me why Paul Staines felt the need to destroy his hard drives after he broke the Damien McBride story?
I'm not sure that this press conference is an opportunity for the committee to ask questions of the press. It seems a rather novel concept. I think if I could ask you to pursue that after the press conference. Yes.
Hi, Josh Halliday from The Guardian. You urged Newsgroup in the report to waive legal privilege for the Burton Copeland advice. Why do you think that would be significant, and will you consider revisiting your conclusions if it is significant?
I think it was a triumph for the committee to persuade News Corporation to withdraw privilege for the Harbottle and Lewis report. But possibly we should have also got them to do Burton Copeland after the evidence that Rupert Murdoch gave to Leveson last week, where he was specifically asked about this by Lord Justice Leveson. And he seemed to attack Burton Copeland in his statement where he kind of blamed the executives for the cover-up. And there was a sort of mumbled comment to do with the report. And I think it would be really important that we just can clear things up. If that report in 2006 alleges that there was wrongdoing other than phone hacking, then it shows that there was a consciousness at the company at that time where an executive should have acted. And I think it's too late for us to take a view on that. But I believe it was the unanimous view of the committee that that report should have privilege waived and should be submitted to Leveson.
Almost all the significant documents that we received during the investigation came as a result of privilege being waived. Clive Goodman's letter, Michael Silverleaf's opinion, the notes from Julian Pike's conversations with Colin Myler all came as a result of privilege having been waived. So I think it's certainly a tempting line to go down.
One of the difficulties in coming to conclusions in this report has been that many people out there know far more than we do, and that includes lawyers and claimants in the civil claims, because even though those have been settled, there have been disclosures which are protected by court confidentiality. In the Gordon Taylor case, a limited waiver of legal privilege was given. Some people might speculate that might have had the effect of just dumping Tom Crone and Colin Myler in it. But we also asked for a waiver of privilege to be given in the Max Clifford case. We just wanted everybody to come clean, to tell us exactly what they knew, and they refused to do that. I just want to. I mean, there are other parts of this report apart from Rupert Murdoch. There's a section on the police. The police and CPS failed over a long period of time. Not just Mr. Yates and Keir Starmer, but their predecessors too. But one of the things that we don't cover in the report covers a lot of ground, but I'd make this comment, it's probably of more interest to legal magazines, is that there was a succession of lawyers, Farrer and Company, Burton Copeland, and indeed Michael Silverleaf QC, who continues to represent News Corporation in settling the civil claims, who we know knew that what News International was telling us and the public about the one rogue report of defence was untrue. Now, it's come out in our conversations and discussions with Speaker's Council that Parliament is not, although it's referred to as a court, not strictly a court for legal codes, but we have not seen any one of those lawyers resigning on principle when they knew that what we were being told and the general public was being told was not true.
Yes, Louise.
Sorry, just to say that there was much disagreement in the committee about this idea. I don't believe lawyers have to represent their clients' best interests within the law, and that is all they have to do. I don't see any occasion for a lawyer to resign for having done his job as he is obliged to do under the law. On the matter of Burton Copeland, I do think, I'm glad that Mr. Halley brought this up, and I do think it's an important one. This was an amendment of Tom's, which I was very pleased to support. He's absolutely quite right, and I'd like to take this opportunity to call on News Corporation's Management and Standards Committee to release Burton Copeland from privilege at once, so that we can have transparency and be quite sure that there is nothing further being concealed. That is absolutely obvious. It should have been done before. He was right to make the amendment, and it received unanimous support from everybody on the committee.
Yes, in the row there. Thank you.
Kate Devlin from the Herald newspaper. Two questions for Mr. Watson. Now that the words fit and proper are in the report, what do you hope happens now? Do you want Ofcom to look at the evidence presented to the committee. And also you've called for the Scottish Parliament to have an inquiry. Do you think that needs to happen urgently?
Okay, we just sorry. Yeah, just to be precise, we use the words "not a fit person." We don't use the "and proper" in the section, just so you get that right. And on the Scottish Parliament part, look, we saw Jack McConnell yesterday admit that he was a target of hacking, and we know that Tommy Sheridan now knows that he was a target of hacking when he was a member of the Scottish Parliament. When we found out similar things had gone on in the Westminster Parliament, we ordered an inquiry. So I would hope that the party leaders in Scotland can come together and organise their own inquiry to find out what the scope of the intrusion into privacy was and what the purpose was.
Thank you. Yep. No.
Tom Newton-Dunn on The Sun. Question for the Chairman. I just wonder if you could guide us on a bit of process in terms of the motion that's going to go before the House. You say in the report and the press release that it'll be just on misleading committee. Can you only put motions before the House that the committee unanimously agrees, or will that come down to a vote as well that may well split on the same lines as it has done so far? And secondly, what is the committee's view? I know that you have no parliamentary guidance on what the penalty for being contempt of Parliament might be, but what would the committee must have some form of view on what you would like to see, perhaps an apology at the bar or something that's been mooted perhaps?
Well, in terms of the motion, my hope is that the committee will be agreed upon it. The reason the motion will focus upon specifically misleading the committee is because that is a matter for the House of Commons. On other matters, select committees produce reports, the government respond within a specified period, and the committees can sometimes request a debate. That would be the normal procedure for a select committee report. But in this instance, we are reporting what we believe to have been a contempt, which is a very different matter, and therefore a debatable motion in the House seemed the appropriate way forward, but it will focus specifically on whether or not contempt has occurred. Now, your question as to if the House of Commons decided that it agreed there had been a contempt, and what happens next, I believe there is precedent, although quite a long time ago, for an offender to be called before the bar of the House, to be admonished and have the House's conclusions made clear to them. But to be quite honest, I don't know. I suspect that will be a matter for debate, perhaps by Standards and Privileges, perhaps by the Leader of the House and others. At this stage, we are intending to table the motion, and I've no doubt that I and perhaps the committee will be involved in subsequent discussions about what would happen if it is then passed by the House of Commons.
My personal view is that an offence should be created similar to the offence of contempt of court, contempt of Parliament, but that is just my personal view. And certainly that's not the case at the moment, but I think we need a defined consequence for misleading Parliament.
We could spend hours on that particular debate, so perhaps we shouldn't. Last question then. Yeah.
Jean Whalen with the Wall Street Journal. Is it possible then that your motion will accuse Rupert or James Murdoch of contempt, or only Hinton, Myler and Crone?
It has not concluded that either Rupert or James Murdoch are potentially guilty of contempt. It has made a number of other conclusions about them, but on the specific question of who presented misleading evidence to this committee and therefore to Parliament, we named 3 individuals. Paul?
Clearly, we're sadly after 5 years not finished yet. We've not been able to go further because of the police investigation. There are other things that may emerge which may warrant a re-examination of the evidence. And I just stress here the human cost, and that Glen Mulcair was not operating in isolation. Because we have not yet had the Motorman database published from the Information Commissioner, we've not been able to make the links between what Mulcair was doing and what the detectives in Motorman were doing, and compare it with the evidence that we were given. Other private detectives were doing other things at the same time, including mounting surveillance over at least one member of the committee. It's been admitted in the civil cases that computer hacking went on. All the pieces of this jigsaw have yet to be put together. But at the end of the day, the human cost of this, the intrusion into ordinary people's lives, really has to be at the forefront of our thoughts and I would hope your thoughts. This was an organisation with its newspapers that gave moral lectures to the public, but acted, as we now know, immorally and criminally itself, and held itself, therefore, above the law.
Thank you. If we have no more questions, thank you very much.